Awesome. Welcome everybody in person, virtual, and replay, however you're consuming it. We're going to talk about podcasting today, and I'll go through a lot of information, but I will give you all of the slides, and I will leave time for questions at the end. I'm always happy to chat with people more about what they have questions about with starting a podcast. So first, I'm Laura. I've lived in Springfield for almost 2 years now. Before that, my husband and I lived all over the country because he was in the military. I started working for myself as a freelance writer because we moved so many times, and that opened up a lot of doors. I used to be a middle school teacher, and so a lot of my teaching colleagues would ask me, hey, how can I do what you do? And that's actually why I started my podcast. So I was doing a lot of one-on-one coffee chats with people, and I was saying the same things over and over. And I was like, I'm going to create a podcast, and that way it's freely available. I had a really good mentor when I started my business, who really taught me the ropes of freelance writing and how to grow it. And so it was my kind of way of continuing that legacy from her, is like, let's give people access to affordable and free resources so that they can avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And that's really turned into a whole second part of my business, which is now coaching and helping other freelancers and technical creatives who work online who are trying to grow their business. I've done 2 TED Talks. I have another one on Saturday, and then these are 4 of my books, and I have the 5th one is coming out in April. So a lot of the reason I mentioned that is because if you want to do other things in your business beyond just reaching your customers with your podcast, having a podcast and that audience was the whole reason that I got my first book deal. Being able to say that I have an audience of X many people who are downloading my content on my email list, etc. And it's the same thing with the TED Talks, because you can say, hey, I have established speaking experience. So podcasting can open a lot of different doors for you. And that's why it's really valuable, even though it is a long-term game. So I started in 2016. I called my podcast Better Biz Academy, which like nobody knew what that was. And in hindsight, I was like, yeah, that's a terrible name. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. So I later switched that to advanced freelancing. And I think we're coming up on around 200 episodes. I've taken some pauses during that time to not release every single week. But when you start doing it weekly, it can be really helpful. So I was also mentioning before we got started recording, I also was a full-time remote employee for a good chunk of the pandemic, and I hosted the Lawyerist podcast, where I got to just interview some really awesome people about all kinds of things in the legal industry, and got to be the producer of that show as well. So I saw a lot more of the technical stuff and how to pitch guests and make sure that you're prepared for an episode when you have a guest and things like that. So it was an awesome experience. I've also hosted 2 short-term like serial shows called Military Spouse Careers and Business Podcast. And then my husband and I do one called Warriors Creed, where we talk about things that people might want to know before joining the military. So to get the slides, it's just bit.ly/startyourpodcast22. And that should give you the whole slide deck. So feel free to download those and reference them later, since it is a lot of information. And I know that it's a lot of details. So to write that down. So here's what I want to chat about today. I want to talk about why podcasting, right? Like, what's a good reason to launch a podcast? Why does it make sense to do it in today's business environment? The basics of starting. What do you really need? What is that going to cost? How should you prep to even launch a show? And then I'm going to go over just some of my best tips from years of doing this and being a host or being a producer of a show, things I've learned along the way, and kind of some mistakes that I've made. So a lot of times people will say at this point, like, well, isn't podcasting saturated? Like, are there too many podcasts? Does it make any sense for me to do this and start it for my business now? Podcasting is, I still feel like it's either coming up to the peak or at the peak of listenership. So there are lots of people who listen to podcasts. 41% of people in the United States listen to a podcast at least once a month. People in certain genres, true crime, office ladies podcasts, those are listeners who are downloading every single week. And so it just depends on what your topic is and how it resonates with your audience. I like to think of mine as building evergreen content too, because occasionally I do seasonal things on my podcast. Like in August, I'll almost always do an episode around what to do during the slow season for freelancers. You're not going to get any business in August, so what can you be doing instead? But I also try to create content that is always good, because you will have a lot of back listeners. You will have people who will go back and listen to something from a year ago if it's good content. So 28% of people listen to podcasts weekly. It's definitely grown and become more popular, but there still is a lot of potential in podcasting. So there are lots of numbers out there about how many podcasts there really are. The top 1% will get more than 3,994 downloads a month. You'll see the numbers here. I share this with you because a lot of people get started and they're like, only my mom's downloading, or only my boss is downloading. I feel really bad that I'm putting all this work into something and 5 people are listening, but the top 50% of podcasts, like you're already ahead of half the crowd if you're getting 30 or more downloads. So it does take time, and for a while it does feel like you're just kind of shouting into the ether. But eventually, if you do enough promotion, you can start to get traction, and it will continue to be something that's really valuable for you. So some good reasons to start a podcast. You will learn a lot. You will become a better speaker. You will become better at preparing things. You will become better at knowing your customers and your clients, especially if you open up avenues for them to ask you questions or submit material or come on the show and be interviewed. My podcast has really been a lead generator for my coaching business. So every time I coach someone, I give them the opportunity. Want to come on my show and talk about what it was like to coach together? What results did you get? That's very valuable for my audience for 2 reasons, because they hear, oh, that person has struggles marketing. I do too. I'm actually normal if this other person has the same problem, but they also see the value of working with somebody else. So you'll learn a lot in that process and really get feedback from your listeners about what they find to be most helpful. I also talk a lot about my failures and mistakes that I've made. I'll be really honest when I fire a client, when I lose a client, when I have a bad month. I will share that on my podcast because it really builds trust with people, and it makes them feel like they can be more vulnerable with me if they're asking for help. You will get better at speaking and interviewing, especially if you have an interview style podcast, which you definitely don't have to have, but it can be a really good avenue to go, is talking to other people, because yeah, you're interviewing this guest for your listeners, but you're also learning a lot too. Sometimes your guest points out something that you didn't think about, or something that's really interesting, makes a connection with you. I've had past guests, refer me to other business people and things like that. So I found that to be really interesting when I hosted the Lawyerist podcast, especially. I really wanted to make sure that I was interviewing people who were being interviewed all the time, and I really wanted them to have a good experience with me. So I always tried to have at least one question that I felt like they'd never been asked before. I did some deep dive into their website or their media kit, or read their book, or got on their email list to ask them something that would make them feel like, wow, this was a really good experience for me too. You will connect with people in a new format. I know, depending on, I'm a fully remote entrepreneur, so I work by myself a lot. It's really nice just to talk to other human beings sometimes, even if it's over a Zoom call where we're recording for a podcast. You get to feel that human to human connection and kind of share notes, especially since I interview other entrepreneurs. Sometimes it's hard, right? Because our family and friends don't always get running a business, but when you're talking to another entrepreneur, there's that instant oh yeah, this really wears on me too. It's really hard to hire other people, and you can kind of vent about the things and challenges that you have. And you can also grow your audience, because this is a really high value item that you're producing. It is also very easy to repurpose it into a blog post, a newsletter, video clips, social media. So if you can put the resources together to create a couple of really good podcast episodes per month, you can kind of liberate yourself from doing some of the other things that take up so much time with marketing, because you can just pull from your podcast. And by starting a podcast, even if you feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome, you're establishing yourself as an expert in your industry just by kind of claiming that space and saying, hey, I'm going to have a show about XYZ. This is something I'm familiar with. I have an inside track. I'm going to be interviewing other guests about this type of problems and issues in our industry. You come across as an expert, and that it really does open the door to other speaking engagements, you being interviewed on other people's podcasts as well. Other podcast hosts love it when you have your own show, because you already have the equipment, you already understand the need for a quiet space, you'll show up on time, you'll be very respectful of being on their shows too. So a couple of reasons not to start a podcast. There are lots of opportunities in podcasting, but if you're like, I'm going to sell stuff tomorrow in episode 1 and cash in and it's going to make a lot of money, you don't have an audience yet. And that's really hard to do that. So podcasting is kind of a labor of love in that it takes a lot of time and it does take some production funds every month to make it happen. And you may not see that financial ROI right away. So that's not a good reason to start it. Or if you're thinking that you can immediately get a sponsor to cover you, unless a sponsor has already come to you and said, hey, I'm in blah, blah, blah industry and I'd really like to be on your podcast because you're claiming this space as an expert. But usually sponsors come around after you have established listenership and can say, this is how many downloads I get per month. This is how many of my listeners, email me and ask questions or engage with me in other ways. So going into it, I just like to be upfront about it. Like, it is going to take some money and it's going to take some time upfront. Not a lot, but that can be hard for entrepreneurs where we like to track ROI and we're like, wow, this is a chunk of my marketing budget that isn't generating returns right away. Why am I sticking with it? So one of the questions I get a lot is, what is the hardest thing about running a podcast? And it really is the consistency, because it's exciting at the beginning and you're like, I've got this. And then like 5 weeks in, you're like, I don't feel like recording an episode today. I don't want to do that. I'm tired. And then all of a sudden 4 or 5 weeks goes by and you've kind of fallen behind. So the consistency is really challenging to stick with it. And then I think the second thing is the cost, just because you have to make the upfront investment in the tech or find a place like here where you can use the tech, while you're present. That will save a lot of time and roadblocks to getting started. But for sure, those are the two things that I always like to be several weeks ahead on my podcast. I will usually spend 1 week a month where I record 5 or 6 episodes, and then we push all of those to the editor immediately so that I don't get sick or have vacation or just have some really big project that makes it hard to stick with the schedule required. So let's dive into what you really need to launch a podcast. A lot of these things are free or mostly affordable. The first is an RSS feed, which is very easy to install on your website, and Apple can help you with it. Apple Podcasts, certainly not the only place you can distribute your podcast. However, it is the industry standard. I would make sure you're at least submitted to Apple Podcasts. And when I talk about audio storage and distribution tools, many of them will push out to all the places, Spotify, like everywhere. Apple Podcasts is a little tricky though, because you have to submit at least 1 episode and your cover art, and it takes them 1 to 3 weeks to review that and make you an official podcast. So I mentioned that because you definitely want to do that a little in advance, and usually maybe just submit your intro episode. It can be 5 to 7 minutes. It can be you saying like, this is what I think the show is going to be about. But you want to make sure that it is approved by Apple Podcasts before you do like a formal launch. Because I know people who've really planned to that launch date and they're like, but Apple hasn't given me the green light yet. And it just causes problems. So that kind of gets into the second place. You need a place to store or host your audio. This will also probably be the place that will distribute your audio for you, and they make it really easy. So 2 industry standards are Libsyn and Buzzsprout, relatively comparable in cost, like $12 to $20 a month to host what you really need for a show that's maybe doing 4 30-minute episodes a month. They would certainly cover that. They charge by how much space your audio takes up, but it's really easy for you to just upload the completed episode, and then you can even schedule in there like, hey, I want this to go live Monday at 5 a.m. and it will push it out to all the distribution channels at that point, and whatever apps people use for their podcast, they'll get it at that time. I do recommend a show introduction or outro. You don't have to do it, but it is nice that if you have something that's maybe 15, 30 seconds, you can do the voiceover over some royalty-free or commercial music that you've licensed. I usually hire a voiceover artist to do mine. And I usually go with a man just because I figure they're going to listen to me for 30 minutes. I'm going to try to give them a little something different audio-wise. But you can do whatever works for you. Like mine is like a short thing that just kind of explains what the show is about in general, and that plays before every episode. Outro is valuable if we're trying to get people to do something after the show. Hey, go to mywebsite.com and make sure you get my free download on blah, 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 or, subscribe and like this show, or, connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever the next action step you're trying to get them to take is. Outros are really nice for that. You can also record custom intros if you want. I used to do that on shows where I would have a guest just so I could hook my listeners quick. I'd be like, today I'm talking to Tom Smith, and you're gonna love this episode because he gives 3 tips for working 5 hours a week, or just something where the listener who's in their car or jogging or whatever is like, do I want to listen to 30 minutes of this? So I like to do a custom intro with just sort of a hook of like, yeah, you should listen to this show. It's really going to be worth your time. So I use places like Fiverr, get the music, have somebody create the audio for you, hire a voiceover artist. If you just do the same show intro every time, which is really easy, you're paying for that one time, right? So you write a little script, and then you'd have a voiceover artist read it. And then when you put your show into production or give it to an audio editor, like I use a guy on Fiverr who's very affordable for that. I just tell him which show it's for. I'll be like, this one's for advanced freelancing. And he just has my intro and outro on his computer already. And he just plugs them all together. So it runs as one continuous show. You do need some cover art. You can always change it. I would just recommend Googling what Apple especially likes for podcast cover art. There is a specific size for it. If it's going to be mostly you on the show, you can do your face on it. If you're not crazy about that, you can use your logo. Just make sure it's something that's easily read by people if they're scanning through. And your cover art will also have like the name of your show on it. So think about that too. Like, what is the name of my show? Where if someone is looking for a new podcast, it's going to make sense that they're Googling the thing, right? So if I want my listeners, I want my show to show up when they search for freelancing in the podcast network. So I'm going to make sure that something about freelancing is in my show's name. You don't have to do that, but it is one less step. It makes it a little easier for people to be able to find you.
On the names real quick, how do you know if the name is used or not? So if you find a name, why not a unique one? Is there
I would go into Apple Podcasts on your computer and just search and see if there's a show. I might also do a quick trademark search just to verify that you're not stepping on someone else's intellectual property. I have seen that happen with a handful of people that, one of my entrepreneur friends owns the trademark to the term visibility vixen. And so someone else tried to launch a show with that name, and she sent them, a takedown notice, and everything was like, you can't use those 2 words together because I have the legal right. So you can just do like a free USPTO trademark search, type what you're thinking of calling it in there, just to make sure someone else can't come after you legally. And then I would just search within the podcast world as well. And that'll be good inspiration for you too. Like, is everyone naming their show similarly in your industry? Is there something you could do to make yours stand out? Are there naming conventions? Usually a couple of words is pretty helpful and not too far beyond that. But yeah, that's what I would do. And then if someone ever does come after you, you can say, hey, listen, I did my research when I started. You must have gotten the trademark or the legal rights since then. And you may consider, if it's something you're going to stick with, trademarking it yourself in the future if you decide to stay with podcasting, just so you can protect your own IP as well.
So does that name have to be unique then to use? So only one person can use each name, and there's no, aside from Apple, there's no database that you can trademark, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have, like, you technically could, like, if someone doesn't have a trademark, right, and they own ABC show, like, I could go start my own ABC show and just put with Laura Briggs at the bottom. But you want to be careful that other people aren't confusing you. Like, there's another Laura Briggs who's a gender and reproductive studies professor at UMass Amherst, and people always confuse the 2 of us, even though we look very different or in very different spaces. So I try to be very intentional just any time that I'm writing or saying anything that I'm not creating any further confusion. So I would recommend a unique name if you can find one. It's not going to be the end of the world if the person doesn't own the trademark, but they always could go, oh, now someone took my show name, so I'm going to apply for it, show that I've had my show 5 years, and I'll get that IP. So yeah, just kind of use your best judgment there.
Cool.
Yeah, I would also recommend templates for social media images. This is something where, if you have the money, sure, you can pay a graphic designer each month. What I would do instead, if you're on a budget, is hire a graphic designer to make you 4 to 5 different templates for social media. So something you can put on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, maybe different colors of your logo, different variations of your show. We have one for mine that has a microphone on it. We have one for mine that has a circle for my picture and a circle for my guest picture. I would just pay a graphic designer once and be like, can you give these to me in Adobe or Canva? And that way someone on your team or you each week can just go plug the episode number, the title into the episode. And that way you're not paying a graphic designer over and over. It just makes it really simple and a little more cost effective.
Can you, and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I have no idea about this stuff. So the template for social media image, so is that like a certain badge for one for LinkedIn, one for
Yeah.
Facebook, and it
Yeah.
just puts the podcast title on there? What's it? So what is it?
Yeah, and I'll see if I can find one for one of mine too. Yeah, it's gonna have the name of the show, the name of the episode, ideally the episode number. If you have a guest, you may also,
So the template is the image behind it, and then you put the words in front of it, and that's where you
Yeah.
just post out.
so it would be like, it's like a shell, right?
Okay,
And so
yeah.
every week you could be like, let me make a new one, and it's gonna have the same color scheme and look. Or maybe you change it out if you wanna be real fancy, but it basically is helping your show up on social media in those different platforms in just in the right sizing, really. So I'll look at that.
If I went to Fiverr and search social media templates, is that, or what is it, podcast templates, or how would I find a creative to do that?
That's a good point. So I would find out the typical sizes for, and most graphic designers know this, but whatever platforms you're going to promote on, and then say, I want a series of, I want 3 variations or whatever you want, 3 to 5 variations of templates to promote my podcast episodes on the following social media platforms. And so if the designer uses something like Canva, they can just give that to you or put that directly in your account. But yeah, I would look for podcast graphics, podcast social media, something like that. My show producer, Melissa, just created mine inside Canva because it was so much easier. Like if I needed to jump in and change something on any particular show, I could, but it was just an easy place for her to be able to find.
Canva's awesome and very user friendly.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. So I will try to pull it up so I can show you all at the end too.
That's good. It clarified a lot. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So the other 2 things you need are the equipment, which this is the biggest one for a lot of people, is like, oh, that feels really technical. It does not have to be super technical. I do recommend a good microphone and a good headset. Sometimes they come together, and I'll share this headset with you, which is literally less than $20. And if you're on a budget at the beginning, it works just fine, and the sound quality is pretty good. You can upgrade to fancier microphones. I don't recommend spending more than $100 on your first microphone because it may not be something you stick with, and you don't need the $400 thing, basically, right? When I hosted the Lawyers podcast, they bought the whole $1,000 setup, and I was like, I understand because the show's sponsored and you really want it to sound good, but for just launching a regular show, you do want something that sounds good though, right? Don't use your phone. The reason for that is, like, if you ever listen to somebody who is like outside walking while they're recording a Facebook Live, you can hear all those other sounds, right? And if that's in your earbuds while you're on the treadmill or in your car while you're commuting, you're like, ooh, this does not sound, I don't want to listen to it even if the content is good. So you do want good quality equipment. Obviously there's some of that here. So like a pop filter just helps a little bit with the quality of you speaking so close to the microphone, just adds a little bit of an extra protection. One of the tips that I got when I took over the Lawyers podcast is to be 1 fist length away from your microphone. So you don't need to be right on top of it. You don't want it to be way over here. Sometimes that's awkward if you're doing a video show and your microphone is right here, but I don't feel like viewers really care that much. The other thing you can do too is, find somebody who's like an audio editor on Fiverr or something like that. Record a 30-second track of you talking and just say, can I pay you $20 to give me any tips? Sit farther back, is my room too echoey? That can be a valuable, like, one-time thing for you to figure out what are the good mechanics of that. Most microphones and headsets will plug into your computer right away. Very easy for that to be picked up. And then I'll talk about some software you can use to record and make that simple too. You do want it to be a quiet place that you can record. If you're not doing video, a closet is a good place because there's a lot of fabric hanging in there that will absorb a lot of sound. You don't want to, like, this is a big echoey room, which is great for doing a presentation. But if we were recording, you're going to hear my voice bouncing off, and that wouldn't probably turn out as nice as a closet or just a small room. You can also, we were talking a little bit about the sound quality before. There's people who make, like, they'll take the foam stuff that you can get to dampen sound or things like that, and just make a little box, and they'll put the box over their microphone, and so one side of the box is open where they're facing it, and that helps bring in some of that sound as well. So yeah, you want a place that's quiet. You don't want the person next to you, like if you're in a room with other people, like you don't want to be in a room with other people anyways if you can avoid it, but paper shuffling, air conditioners turning on, dogs barking, fans, those things will get picked up by very good microphones. So you want it to be as quiet as possible while you're recording, even if it's just you doing your own show. So the other thing I'll share with the tech, like you do want the mic and you want the headset, because if you're recording with other people, you will get audio feedback. So let's say you're on Zoom and you're interviewing your guest there, or you're using another one that I'll share a little bit more about later called Zencaster. You don't want to hear on the show your voice echoing out of their speakers or vice versa, because then your audio editor has way more work to do. So everyone on the show should always have a microphone and headset. It can be the cheap little Apple headphones that you get when you upgrade your phone. I don't even know if they do that anymore, but like the cheap $10 headphones will be sufficient for the other guests. You should have good headphones if you're interviewing people, because you want to hear what they sound like. So I always did a sound check with people before we recorded. I was like, yeah, I hear this sound, do you have a fan on in the room? So you want to have headphones so you've got good sound quality. But it is important for the other person to have headphones, because it's a mess and it's super expensive. These headphones are like less than $20 and they work just fine. The only challenge with it is that it does have this like headpiece, and you need to sit really still. So like you have to kind of train yourself, like don't touch your face, don't shift too much as you're recording, because if you bump this, that's going to get picked up. I even put, like, my mother-in-law is notorious for just showing up. And so I will put a sign on the door, like, I am recording right now. Please don't ring the doorbell. I'm going to lose 45 minutes of content doing that. So just think about those little things. If you're doing it at work or if you're doing it at home, give other people a heads up. Hey, I'm recording right now. If you have not great internet, tell everybody don't be streaming 4K while I'm trying to do this thing. A mixer or recorder is optional. That's what this is. These are technical, right? Like this is something where a pro should set this up. That may be another thing where maybe you find freelance podcast editor or somebody on Fiverr and say, can you help me set my, like literally you're holding your webcam over and you're like, what should this dial be at? You don't have to have this. It will make your sound quality better, but if you're a beginner, don't stress out about, oh, I have to have the mixer and I have to have it perfect the very first time. I would say, like, if you're going to spend on anything, get a good microphone. The microphone is important. There's another really popular one for beginning podcasters. It's called the Blue Yeti. Very easy to use. It's a USB mic. The only downside of the Blue Yeti is that it captures sound from all over the room, whereas a directional mic is only capturing what is coming directly in front of it, right? But the Blue Yeti does work just fine, and plenty of professional podcasters use that. And I feel like it's around like $80 to $100 to get that. So once you have your tech, the next thing to consider is what is going to be your purpose, your format, your schedule. Even if this changes a little, you want to commit to some of it in advance so that you have a good framework to start with. So who are you trying to reach? How long is each episode going to be? If you're new to this, 15 to 20 minutes is a good place to start. That's the length of a commute for a lot of people. It's part of the length of a workout. Like people can be sweeping their floors or doing whatever and listen to that episode. It's much more of a commitment for somebody to listen for an hour or even 40 minutes. So you can work up to that if you want to. But most podcasts are between 15 and 30 minutes, and that's a nice sweet spot. It's not too much talking for you. It can be a little tight with a guest. So 20 minutes is sort of short. That's only usually a handful of questions with a guest, but it's a good place to start and then see how you feel with that. And then just kind of brainstorm, do you want to do only solo episodes? Do you want to do episodes with guests? I've worked with some law firms before where they always have 3 of the partners will be on the show, but which 3 partners that is changes every single week. That just helps you know how much other work you're going to have to do. And I'll kind of talk about pros and cons of solo versus guest show. You can also do a mix, just as long as you prepare your listeners for something that's relatively standard. It's hard if your episode one week is 15 minutes, and then the next week is 65, and then the next week it's with a guest for 10 minutes. And it's hard for them to know what to expect and set aside that time in their schedule. So you want to strive for something that's relatively consistent for you. And then how often will you release? There's not a wrong answer here. You will get the best traction if you release weekly or bi-weekly, just because you're creating a habit for your listeners. Oh yeah, Laura's show always comes out on Mondays at 6 a.m. I'm going to listen to that on my way to work or whatever. It is a lot more work, of course, than releasing a season. So people who do seasonal podcasts may say, hey, twice a year, I release 12 episodes and I'll do 12 in a row and then we'll have a break. And then we'll come back and do 12 more episodes. Do whatever works for you, right? There's not a wrong answer, but you will get more traction the more consistent that you are. Weekly can be a lot of work. I won't lie about that. It can be hard to stick with just because there's so much that goes into preparing for the episode and then producing it. But again, there's no wrong answer. There have been people who have been very successful with seasons, and there are people who do bi-weekly. There's even people who do once a month. But if you're really doing this to build your audience, I would say minimum of bi-weekly. The best case scenario is that you can do it weekly, but definitely don't let the fear of, wow, I don't have time or resources to do that weekly hold you back, because you can choose bi-weekly or seasons and still be effective. So let's talk a little bit about a solo show. Most of my episodes of Advanced Freelancing are solo episodes because we looked at the data and those were the ones that got more downloads. If you're not ready to launch an interviewing guest yet, it's fine for you to just be a solo show or with your employees or, a guest here and there, but not any expectations from your audience of like, yes, every 3rd week of the month, I have a guest. You don't have to be that rigid with it. It can be tiring to do it all yourself, because one of the nice things about interviewing people is that you don't have to come up with all the content. You have to come up with the questions, but you're not like, wow, what am I going to say, right? If I'm going to sit down for 25 minutes, I need to have bullet points in front of me of what do I want to make sure I cover in this 25-minute episode by myself. The nice thing about solo show, you never have to worry about a guest canceling. It does happen. People forget, their audio quality isn't good. They just ghost you. And that's frustrating when you're sitting there and you've got all the recording equipment ready to go and your editor or your team was waiting for this episode and you're like, this person didn't show up. What do I do now? So you never really have to worry about that with a solo show. As long as you're showing up regularly, that's not a problem. A guest show does give more variety, right? Because you can't always predict the avenues that it's going to go down. Your guest may say something really interesting. Maybe you have some questions that are prepared in advance, but then they take you down another road that you just weren't anticipating during the show. And it gives some great variety. It's also your chance to pick people's brains and like learn more about them. But that comes at a cost of you have to do more work and prep required. I know some people who are brave enough, they show up on their show with a guest and like, I'm just going to ask you like whatever comes to mind. I always try to have at least 5 questions that I've got prepped. And then that leaves some room for some genuine conversation between me and the person. But I also don't want to feel like I'm out of questions and it's only been 4 minutes or something. And then my guest is like, wow, you really didn't spend any time preparing for this. So there is more work and prep required, right? Because we have to find the guest. We have to get them to commit. We have to tell them our expectations of, make sure you have a good internet connection and in a quiet room and have a headset. And then guests always have questions too. Some of them will be like, I want to know the exact questions I'm being asked. Some of them are more free flowing. Sometimes you have to schedule with their admin, depending on who it is. So it's a little bit more work. And of course, you have to find the guests, right? And it's hard to figure out, well, how am I going to make sure I have enough guests for the season? When I hosted the Lawyers podcast, I would do what I called like a pitch frenzy. I would find like 30 people and I would pitch all of them in 1 week. And then I would drip those recordings out from whoever said yes over the course of the next few months, because I never wanted to be in that position of, oh, we have an episode due tomorrow and who the heck am I going to interview? I can't get somebody in time to pull that together. So you got to do a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen and get it out. So a couple of recording options, lots of software out there. StreamYard, if you're doing a video show, actually all three of these will allow you to do video shows. StreamYard is pretty user-friendly from a guest perspective. If you can capture just audio, I believe, but you can get video too. So let's say that you had prepared your guest, that maybe you weren't going to release the whole video, but you're going to have someone on your team pull out an interesting 2-minute clip. StreamYard may be good because you can send your editor or your team member and say, hey, about 17 minutes, the guest made a really good comment about this. Can you make that into the video clip? And we can push that out on Instagram or somewhere else. Zoom is also an option. The default audio recording in Zoom, like if you just hit record, is not the best. And it's okay, but it's not like the highest quality. And then more advanced options usually require a mixer with Zoom. So it's not normally my favorite for beginners, just because it's a little more complicated. And sometimes Zoom can be buggy. I'm sure you've all experienced that. So sometimes if things are cutting out, I had a lot of problems interviewing more than one guest on Zoom. My audio software just really struggled to understand that there were 3 people that it was capturing the audio from. So it's not my favorite, but it is possible. And then Zencaster is actually what I use. I really like it because it creates a custom URL for each guest. I also use it to record my solo shows. I just set it up as, episode 181, pitching on Upwork or whatever I want to call it. And then you show up, you don't have to have video on, into this room, and it records right there, and you can automatically link it to Dropbox. So your stuff can go boop to Dropbox immediately. That way you have a backup. You can share that with your editor. It's, I want to say, between $15 and $20 a month. Very cost effective. It's very user friendly for guests because it walks them through when they show up. It'll do like a quick audio check for them, and then you just see their line of, and you can see it as it's recording too. So you'll get flagged if there's any problems. So that one's very user friendly, and you can do that for solo or for guests. One of the most expensive aspects of producing a podcast is audio editing and production. Some people do it themselves. So if you are an audio engineer, self-taught or otherwise, and this is your passion, do it. Otherwise, I don't recommend it because it can take hours, and just to get the skill set of deleting ums, ahs, sneezes, coughs, melding it all together, it can take hours to do that if it's not something that you're like, I just love audio editing. So I use freelancers to do this. You're more like people who do this professionally, this is their full-time thing, are probably going to charge $100 an episode, which is a lot, right? There is a guy on Fiverr that I use who's great, that it's like $35 for an episode up to 30 minutes. So I am always watching myself when I'm recording, trying to make sure I don't go over 30, just because it's going to cost me $15 more just to edit that episode. But that's very cost effective. Aside from investing in the good tech, like a nice microphone, I would recommend investing in at least an audio editor. You don't need the $100 an episode person. You don't need the agency that does it for $800 a month. But you want somebody to clean up basic things. You don't want your listeners hearing your coughing fit. It's also nice to have an editor, because when I interview guests, sometimes they'll stumble over their words. They'll say, actually, I didn't want to say that at all. Can I start over? And it's nice to have a human being that you can go to and say, yeah, at 13 minutes, they said this and they stumbled over their words and they really don't want that released. Can you just delete it? And it's nice to know that someone's going to clean it up and make your guests feel like they had a really good experience too, because it happens. Or literally I was recording an episode on burnout with, there's a pair of sisters that wrote this leading book on burnout. And in the middle of our recording, she received an artisanal cheese delivery by bike. It was just like, I was like, well, this is appropriate for the burnout episode, like self-care. You can get your cheese delivery by bike if that's important to you, but you can hear the bike horn. And so I had to tell the editor, like, can you please delete that at this minute? Because I don't want my listeners driving and then all of a sudden there's this really loud bike horn in their ear. So it's nice to have a human do it. And it's a good experience for your guests and also for your listeners.
Do you know the Fiverr guy's tag name?
I will find it for you, yes, because I use him all the time and he's just so fast.
It's such a coin toss on there. I mean, you look at reviews and everything, and I've had great instances, and I've had some that just take forever and they don't deliver it.
And that may be some, okay, so it's MOINSPO, Mo Inspo, and I've used him probably for 50 episodes or so.
Awesome.
But yeah, and you might try a couple people too, like maybe your first episode, you hire 3 and you see who did the best. So yeah, let's chat about tips for releasing your episodes. If you're going to do a weekly show, try to release at the same time every week. Again, it's creating that habit. There's not a wrong day to release your podcast episode. I would stick to weekdays if you can, just because people are more likely to listen to it. I've had mine on Mondays. I've had mine on Thursdays. I do recommend setting it for like first thing in the morning, just so you hit people in their inbox or notifications before the day gets super busy. Always load it in advance to your audio host. So you can upload it at the last minute to Buzzsprout or Libsyn and just kind of say, hey, publish right now. But just in case there's anything you want to change, it just makes your life easier to schedule it in advance. So my producer, Melissa, when we release episodes on Mondays, she always sends me everything on the Thursday before so that I can check the social media, I can check the show notes, I can check the email that's going out to the guest if we had one saying, hey, thanks, here's the episode, please share it on your social. It just makes your life less stressful rather than waking up on that morning and having to push through and possibly making a mistake, right? One of my favorite tools, I'm pretty sure you can still use it for free. It's limited what you can do each week, but it's one of those things where if you use different Gmail addresses, you can create several different things. The Headliner app is a great tool for creating little snippets from your show. So with Lawyerist, one thing we did that worked really well is I would find the most interesting 2-minute segment from the show. We would drop our podcast cover art in the background of this little video, and then we would use that on LinkedIn. I mean, you can use it anywhere, but like we use LinkedIn because our audience was there, and it would be a teaser, right? It would be like, do you want to hear more about what so-and-so had to say or how they answered the rest of this question? It's just a nice extra promotional thing that you can use. And your guests may be more interested in sharing something like that where their actual voice is on it rather than just a static image. So I love Headliner for that. If you did do an episode with a guest, tag them on social media, right? So that you're instantly being shown to all of their audience. You can ask guests to share it. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned is that my bosses at Lawyers were always like, let's get the biggest name guest we possibly can, because that's going to get us the most downloads. We actually didn't see that happen, right? Like, because you would think that these people who are the biggest names, we're going to get the most traction back on our show by hosting them. But really it was more about the content. So don't stress out too. Like if you have a guest that nobody knows, but they're giving really good content, or even if you're not known in your industry yet, but you're really putting the time in to prep for the show and make it a good show, it will happen over time. So yes, tag the guest, but also don't count on them to be what carries you kind of to the next level or boost your downloads. And then these are just some of my random like best tips, and then I'll have plenty of time for questions. Always know your purpose and format first. You will confuse your audience if you are all over the place. And then there's definitely going to be an aspect of finding your footing. Like you're going to go back and listen to your first episode someday and be like, wow, this was awful. I wasn't good at all, right? And that's okay. We all know that as entrepreneurs, everything you put out when you first start something.
Be brave enough to be bad at something.
Yeah, it's not perfect, right? But at least knowing your purpose and format, it helps tell people what your show is about. So if you're like, I'm talking about business. It's like, well, what do you mean? What within business? A certain industry, a certain thing? Because it doesn't tell people what the unique hook of what you're doing is. So you might talk about how you can narrow it down into your industry or why your perspective is unique. Brain dump as many ideas for episodes as you can. Do this in advance because there will be times that your brain is just tired and you're like, I don't know what I want to talk about and I have to record an episode tomorrow. So I keep a master list. Another thing that was really helpful, ask your email list if you have one. I had a Facebook group when we started mine, and we would ask every person in the questions to join, what is something you want to learn from Laura? And then my business manager would drop it in this brain dump spreadsheet. So I'd be like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. Like, oh, that's a good question. So you crowdsource if you can, but brain dump. I mean, my husband and I, when we started Warriors Creed, we took the train from here up to Chicago for a weekend. And on the train ride, we literally came up with like, what is every question someone would have about joining the military that they would want to hear from someone who's really been there. And we came up with like 50 ideas, right? Which is like almost like a year's worth of weekly episodes. So brain dump so that your future self will thank you during the times when you're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to talk about. You just pick something. Another big one, launch with 6 to 7 episodes. 5 is good too, but like 6 is a dream that are already done because it can catch up with you fast. And it's like, I don't recommend launching with 1 because then you need time, the Fiverr guy I shared with you, it takes like 2 business days to edit stuff. And then we've got to upload that into Libsyn. And then I've got to tell someone on my team to make the social graphics. So like, if I was going to release an episode Monday, today would be the last day for me to get all those things to everybody, and that would still be rushed. So it's always nice to have extra. I also once a quarter record what I call emergency episodes. Those are, I have laryngitis or like something has happened. It's an evergreen content that I can just say, hey, use the emergency episode. That's from teaching days. You always have an emergency substitute lesson plan, and it will come up that you're just like, and then at the end of the quarter, if we haven't used it yet, I just say, just make that the last episode to take that pressure off. Yeah, and hire a professional editor, even if it's someone who's inexpensive, even if it's someone from Fiverr or, your cousin is learning audio engineering right now and you want to try them out. It does help. It makes things sound a little bit cleaner and it's a better, more professional experience for your listeners. And it makes you look good too, right? People love listening to podcasts, even if they're not your target client. Your family, your friends will want to support you and you want it to be a good experience for them too. So as you can see, like a lot of this comes down to preparation. It's not the actual recording of the episode, although that's important. A lot of it is setting up your system for you to be successful every time that you are ready to record, having the editor that you can turn to, having the social media templates ready to go. My main thinking is if my business manager gets sick, I want to know enough that I could do everything myself if I had to. It may not be perfect and it will not look as good, but I want to make sure I can dive in there and do it if I need to. So that's why having those systems, we have a checklist, we have a template email that goes out to a guest that my business manager just copies over from Google Docs. She just adds in the link of the show and it says like, hey, thanks so much for being on Advanced Freelancing. Your episode comes out November 8th. Here's the link to it. I've attached the social graphics. We'd love it if you could tag Laura, like blah, blah, blah. Same thing every time. Just makes it faster for you and easier. So I'm sure people have specific questions and I'm happy to take them. Yes.
What do you think about Anchor?
I know that it is, so that is like the one exception to the good tech rule, which is if you have more of a casual show and you feel like the tech or setting a regular recording schedule is an impediment to you starting, Anchor is recorded directly from your phone. And so it can be released a lot faster. So if I would say like, it's not as like, I'm not actually sure of the statistics, but like, you want to be at least on Apple Podcasts. I think you can still upload your episodes from Anchor into Apple. If you want to have a podcast and your biggest hesitation is the tech and the production work, and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to do this, even if it's not perfect, then yes, go ahead and use Anchor. If you really want your show to be seen as more like as a professional podcast, even if you're not looking to make money from it or anything right away, I would eventually think about transitioning. But like if your audience is on Anchor, like let's say that that's your segment of the demographics, like that's what they listen to. Okay, then do it, right? Like that, then it's fine to deviate from it. I don't think it's like worse. There's just sort of an industry stigma around things that are recorded from the phone being less professional. And I know that's not necessarily true because you can spend a lot of time to produce a quality episode and do that. And, you know, we were talking about the biggest challenge to starting a show is the consistency. So if you're like, you know what, I know we can commit to doing 20 minutes a week on Anchor and on the phone, we'll just do it in a quiet room, then it's okay to do that, right? And then if you hear feedback from people or you're noticing that your downloads are really slow, it might be time to think about switching and trying something different. But it's definitely an option that's out there.
Sometimes they have like a web-based version too.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
So
I'm curious about your template, to be honest with you. So I know you had the template for your, you know, you're thanking your guests afterwards, but I'm sure there's a template for even setting up a podcast. You're reaching out to your team, you're saying, hey, we need social for these things, and then you have these checklists. And then you're reaching out to your team, or you're sending the intro and exit to your editor, which you guys already has.
Yeah.
I'm just curious for that whole template that you go through for a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, Melissa created one on our podcast Trello board. I think so. It starts like we use Trello, which you can use any project management tool, but each episode of my podcast on Trello gets a card, and we preload the checklist on there, find the guest, confirm the title. Like, I don't give any of the stuff to my producer, Melissa, until I'm done recording the episode. So we use the Trello board because we can all dump ideas on there. If she hears something where she's a freelancer too, so she'll just drop something in the ideas column, and we move the card from pending to recorded to in audio edits to ready to be published and then published. And then when it goes to ready to be published, that's when I will tag her on the card and say, hey, it's ready for you. And that's when she does social media graphics. She creates show notes, which you can't. Show notes are basically just a text version of your show. They can be anything from several bullet points to 300 words to an exact transcript of the show. It's really up to you. We kind of go like in that middle, like 300 words, 250 to 300 words with some bullet points. But yeah, I'll see if if she has that checklist saved on,
And I apologize while you're looking.
Yeah,
at that,
no, you're
over the
fine.
high level, you said it's recorded. Now it's
Yes.
edited. Now it goes for audio. What?
audio editing. Audio edit. So like that's when, so I handle everything up to the point where the audio editor has it. When I'm done with the episode, I hop on Fiverr and I say, hey, here's the Dropbox link. It's for this show. He confirms he's got it. And then I will tag my producer and say, hey, Melissa, this is an audio edits. Just as a reminder to her to like go back and check that the show like is edited.
And then she publishes it on one of she's on StreamYard or.
She publishes it on Libsyn.
On
Yes, so
Libsyn.
it goes to Libsyn. We'll see if she's got it on here. We're gonna make this. It likes to make my stuff real small.
So, and Libsyn is another recording option, is that right?
It's not a recording option, but it is an audio host.
Audio
A very
host.
easy to use audio host. And that's where you will upload your actual episode, the final completed episode too. So like when it comes back from the audio editor, that's where you would drop it. Let's see if she's done this. So she created a template of like this is for advanced freelancing. I know it's a little small, but like it has add episode to Trello card. So like it's her job to add, like she just copies this whole thing over when we have a new episode coming up and we'll put the number in there. It's my job to do the episode title, but she'll do the release date. And then you can see it has different people assigned to it. So like add recording to Dropbox, that's me because that happens automatically. After recorded, send to Fiverr, also me. But then I'll tag her on here and say like, hey, it's ready for you. And she'll do all the rest of the stuff, the transcript, show notes, graphics, the audiogram, which is the headliner app. We have one of our template graphics, which I'll see if I can pull that up here too. Actually, some of these are on.
Do you mind if I take a picture of your checklist here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you.
Go ahead. That's just and like you can tweak yours too. Like maybe you have an email newsletter. And so you want to have a thing on there like mention an email newsletter.
That's perfect. And see, I'm a process geek and I love, this is,
Yeah.
this is scalable.
So see, here's some of the templates but like, I know they're small, but that's one episode from my military spouse one. And we have a few different ones. So like this was an interview episode. So it's got a picture of me, it's got a picture of my guest, the episode number, but then we'll share like, we may share this one separately, or like this one is meant to go in my inbox or in my email newsletter and things like that. So we just create different ones for each show. So like the one with me and my husband, it always we'll swap out what it's called, but it always has like the picture of us, and then it has our name on it.
And so that's your initial graphic there, right? That's what
Yes.
you're scrolling through. That's what people are going to see on the podcast. Then.
Yeah.
It's cool
Mhm.
catching.
Yeah. And so that may be something where you're like, I want to hire a graphic designer just to make me a few versions within my color scheme with my logo.
Yeah.
And then if it's on Canva, it's something where you can just go in and change that very easily yourself. But yeah. And then that's like, if you have a guest, there's another, like I think you saw on the checklist card, you're going to want to get their bio. You want to ask for their headshot. You want to ask if they want any links. So like, here's one that we recorded with a guest where Melissa added the person's headshot. Like, so she'll handle all of that pre-guest communication. But if she knows that I'm in the process of working on the episode, she'll add the person's headshot just so it's easier and there for her to grab. So you can be as fancy or not with that, but come up with your system of like, how can this be easy for me and my team to do? Because this is a lot if you're doing it yourself, right? It's a lot to be like, did I ever get so-and-so's bio? Now I got to go dig back through my email. So having a system and a project management tool of your choice will definitely make it easier for you to see where things are at. And we will just drag an episode, like content ideas is just like, we've just dropped ideas there. When we drag it into recorded, that means like I've actually recorded that show, and then it just kind of moves along my board to the right until it's over in like, she's got 3 different categories because we have 3 different shows, but it says like complete, advanced freelancing, complete. And that way we always know where everything is at if we need to find it too. So that works for me because I'm a visual person, but you can use whatever tool works for you. Spread Google Sheets, you could do for something very similar.
Cool.
Yes.
That master's class, just with that checklist, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
giving people the information so they don't make the same mistakes you did. That checklist right there is going to save
Yeah.
months and years of time
Yeah.
trying to figure out, okay, I mean, you can get it right, but seeing that was very helpful. I'm very,
Okay,
very glad
good.
you offered that. So that's huge.
I'm glad. Yeah. Happy to share resources of anything I have, because that consistency is so hard, and anything that just makes it a little bit faster. Like when I pulled myself out of the process more and had my team help with it, that was big for me, because I was like, okay, all I have to do is find the guests and interview them. That's it. Everything else is taken care of by someone else. So my friction level about recording an episode is much lower, because I know that my part is actually quite small and someone else is going to pick it up. So look for things that, like even Zencaster taking the recording and automatically dropping it into a Dropbox folder of all my stuff. That's a link I just give to the Fiverr guy right away. I don't have to wait for anything to upload. I don't have to download it and find out I didn't do it right, or, whatever. So yeah, I'm always looking for ways to make things a little faster.
Especially when we're,
Yeah, because you're also running a business.
Yeah.
You're already the
Yeah.
VP of too many departments running your own business. Like, you don't also need to be like, and now I'm producing this whole podcast.
You killed me.
So, yeah. Other questions?
Is there any advantage to being exclusive? Like, I know some podcasts are like Spotify exclusive. There's one I listened to where
Yeah.
they were with it, like just kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
Then it became Spotify exclusive through some partnership. And
Yeah.
now they're everywhere again. They decide to need that. It's like, what is the advantage and disadvantage? Like, if you're able to do that.
My general thinking is it's better to be everywhere, because you never know where your listeners will be unless you are receiving some sort of special deal to launch where they're saying, yeah, we want you to be exclusive to only Apple Podcasts and not release on Spotify or not release anywhere else. My general thinking is like, and I'll show you all Libsyn too, that I want to be everywhere, because I don't know where my listeners are going to come from. I know we had to do a special process to get added to Spotify, but it was worth it, because that was extra listeners per month that just like, I don't even listen to podcasts on my Apple Podcast app. I listen on Overcast. So it's like, my thinking is, how many other people out there are like that?
So I tried finding yours. I use Podcast Addict.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't find yours on there, but I
See?
found it on Spotify.
See, it's weird, like, and
So
you
it's
want to
just
try
like-
to be everywhere you can, right? Let's see if we have, I was trying to see if I could show you like, when it gets uploaded. Let's see, I don't do this as much, but like, it's tools like Buzzsprout and Libsyn are relatively easy to use. And like, so this little thing here, that's my general podcast cover art. And I don't know exactly what size that is, but that's like the general one that just should show up with the podcast. And then you'll have to fill out some basic information like your website. And like, if you use Libsyn, they will, or Buzzsprout, they will do the RSS feed thing for you so that it kind of automatically will connect to your website. And that's why it has my website, but also has a Libsyn thing in there. But they're very easy to use once you get started. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like, I always wonder about that with the exclusive thing too. Like what I always wonder when people do that. A lot of authors do that sometimes too, where they won't put themselves in like the Kindle Unlimited program because they want to be considered wide, which means your book is available everywhere. So if there's a specific benefit to you being exclusive, someone's going to sponsor your show, all of your listeners are there, nobody's downloading you anywhere else, then yeah, consider it. Otherwise, my thinking is I want to reach every person who could possibly find my show. And that means being as broadly found as possible.
So you would record on Zencastr.
Yeah.
And then send it to the editor,
Yes.
and then the editor would put it on Ibsen, or you would put it on, they'd send it back to you after the audio and video is edited and come back to you on Ibsen.
Yes, it comes back to me.
Over Dropbox, and then you upload it to either to
Yes.
the one that goes easily to Dropbox or just straight to Ibsen, right?
He will send us the file back, and then that will be uploaded to the audio, that will be uploaded to Libsyn to go
Okay.
out.
Okay.
And like, I'll just show you how easy this is.
And they schedule it, like you said, you can, and
You
they'll
can
schedule
say
it
like,
for you. and-
yeah, you can say, I want this particular episode to go out next Thursday at noon, and it will automatically release at that time. And I subscribe to my own podcast, so I could always make sure of that. I would always check, like, did it come out today or not? But like, if you're recording an episode in Zencastr, it's so easy, like test episode, and then I'm gonna say, I don't want video, I just want audio. It will create this specific link. And so when I do my calendar invitations to my guests, if I'm recording with someone, I literally just put that URL that's in the top there into the invitation so that they know that that's where we're going to meet. And when someone else joins this room, I will see them show up under my name. I can see if they've muted themselves, and we just talk. And then I literally will just hit record and it will start recording. And I should be able to see, like, you can see the audio line of me talking because it's recording me right now. And then when it's done, it will say that it's uploaded it to Dropbox and it's good to go. Or I can download the MP3 or WAV right here. So very easy, and it's not too weird for your guests when they sign in. It's like they can make sense of that interface.
Is
So
there a
you-
cost for Zencastr?
Yes, I feel like it's between $15 and $20 a month, something like that. Yes, and I believe there is also for StreamYard. Probably the only one. Well, I guess Zoom would be like if you're doing less than 40 minutes.
I think Anchor is free too.
Yeah. So just like, and if that's a point of friction for you doing it, like just look for something where you can be consistent. You don't need to upgrade to the fancy stuff, certainly not when you're starting. You may start this and realize you don't like it, or you may over time realize, hey, this is really working. I want to upgrade our tech, or I want to have a better recording experience for guests. I recorded through Zoom for a long time. And I just found like there were so many bugs that it was becoming a problem with editing. And I was like, all right, we're going to switch. We're going to try something else just because it's been becoming an issue.
So this is Ibsen or Zencastr?
This is Zencastr right here. And then this is Libsyn, which
Okay.
is where you can just pick your drop down. Like,
Oh, so Zencastr is another recording option. You go there to record. Okay.
yes, that's there to record.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where do you view like the stats? Would that be on your audio host or?
That's on your audio host. Yes, that's going to show you like your general stats of however many people have looked at a specific thing per episode and stuff like that. That's also something I will go back to if like if we burned through the emergency episode and we really need something, I'll be like, find me the most downloaded episode from 2 years ago. And we're just gonna re-release it this week because we can't handle it. So it's nice to also see, and if you're like dry on ideas, to go back and look and be like, okay, people really liked this topic. Can we do a variation on that? Can we interview someone who has the opposite viewpoint of the guest we had on, or something like that? So it is valuable to look at those stats, but it is slow. It takes a lot of time for it to kind of gain traction. But what I found personally is for people who ended up paying me for something, buying one of my courses or buying coaching, 9 times out of 10, they'd listen to the podcast, right? So if you're selling something where your listeners are buying your expertise or you talking, right? Like if someone's buying a coaching session, they're paying me to talk them through a business problem. So it was a way of like weeding out people who maybe weren't a fit. Because if they listened to my podcast for free and were like, oh, I really like Laura's style, they felt much more confident to buy something because they kind of already knew the product, so to speak. So it can be expensive to produce, but it's also like the highest quality clients that I have had come through the coaching side of my business. Almost all of them are podcast listeners. Even people who will be like, oh, I just started listening 6 months ago, but I went back and listened to all the old stuff. So yeah.
So those things just plug right into the computer, huh?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's how basic I had to get.
I've seen it happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plug right in, both things
Your
plug right in the
computer,
computer, okay?
Your computer will pick it up.
All right.
Yeah, and then you just want to make sure, like when you're in Zencaster or wherever you're recording, that like sometimes it's funky, right? It'll be like MacBook Pro speakers, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want as my output. So I just like to verify, but you can check all of that, pretty easily when you're in those tools. But yeah, it's gotten a lot better. It used to be a lot more complicated, and using a recorder is definitely like advanced stuff. So don't feel pressured like you have to do that right away. You can plug this in and test your settings, test your volume and stuff. Maybe do like record a fake one in Zencaster and then listen to yourself. And like, oh wow, I'm really loud. I'm way too close to the mic. You can do some self troubleshooting too. That's pretty valuable.
Great job.
Deepak, did you have any questions? We're just doing some questions.
What's up, Deepak? Happy Deepak?
I was on the video side, then I just came in.
Oh, great.
Was listening.
Oh, awesome.
Well, Laura, I just want to say thank you so
Yeah,
much.
no
You've
problem.
just done so much to demystify the process, and this was so informative.
Good,
Just on software and the teams that you build and everything. So
Cool.
thanks again,
Yeah.
and make sure you all check out her Laura's previous program, Solopreneur Scaling: How to Grow a Freelance Business at the Company of One, which is also published on the Innovate Springfield YouTube channel.